Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to frame the late 19th century Italian-Ethiopian conflict in a slightly different way today. We aren't just going to look at it as a war, but rather as the ultimate corporate hostile takeover attempt. And right at the center of the defense was an executive who put on an absolute masterclass in political leadership and diplomacy. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly can modern CEOs and management teams learn from a 19th century empress facing the forceful acquisition of her entire nation? Well, as we're about to find out, pretty much everything.
Empress Taytu Betul once famously declared, "I am a woman and I do not love war, but rather than accepting this, I prefer war." Man, those are the words of the real hero of our case study today. You know, every great leadership team needs balance. If her husband, Emperor Menelik, was the patient, highly diplomatic good cop CEO who kind of wanted to trust his European partners, Taytu was the ultimate bad cop executive. She brought this necessary, piercing skepticism to the boardroom. When foreign invaders tried to cleverly maneuver their way into controlling her nation, she saw right through their tactics and absolutely refused to back down, proving that sometimes real executive resolve means preparing for the hardest possible fight.
Before we get into the boardroom battles, we really need to understand the mind of the executive we're studying. Taytu wasn't just royalty, she had an incredibly sharp intellect. As an Oromo aristocrat, she was highly educated. I mean, she composed her own poetry, she played chess, and she understood the complex geopolitical board of the 19th century way better than most European diplomats did. When she married Emperor Menelik, she brought not only vital political legitimacy to his reign, but an unyielding strategic resolve. She was officially addressed as the Light of Ethiopia. And honestly, that chess player mentality of hers was exactly what our country needed when dealing with powers trying to plunge that light into darkness.
So, here is our syllabus for today. We'll be covering 5 key modules: the ultimate hostile takeover, reading the fine print, mastering the supply chain, innovation during crisis, and finally, building a lasting legacy.
Let's jump right into Module 1, the ultimate hostile takeover in reading the fine print.
Every modern professional knows the danger of blindly clicking agree on a convoluted terms of service document, right? Well, back in 1889, Italy tried to sneak a catastrophic clause into the ultimate terms of service, the Treaty of Wychele. Basically, there was a massive discrepancy between the two language versions of Article 17. The Amharic version stated Ethiopia may use Italy's diplomatic services if it chose to. Sounds fine. But the Italian version effectively claimed Ethiopia must become an Italian protectorate. Italy literally attempted to use a mistranslation to stealthily acquire Ethiopian sovereignty. Emperor Menelik's advisors completely missed it. But Empress Taytu, with her meticulous executive eye, she caught the discrepancy right away and immediately sounded the alarm.
The resulting negotiation stalemate was intense. Just imagine the tension in that room. The Italian diplomat Antonelli is sweating, desperately trying to save face. He warns them that canceling the article would cost Italy its dignity in Europe. But Taytu completely shuts him down. She firmly states that Ethiopia too must retain its dignity and would never be treated as a protege or a subsidiary. She called his bluff perfectly. She acted as this fierce negotiator who absolutely refused a subsidiary merger, forcing the total cancellation of the treaty, knowing full well it meant their competitors would resort to war.
Which brings us to Module 2, Mastering the Supply Chain.
Over 100,000. I really want you to pause and think about that number for a second. That is the sheer scale of the asset management Empress Taytu was suddenly responsible for. The Ethiopian army had to march roughly 1,000 kilometers to confront the invading Italians up north. They had to cross incredibly brutal geographical terrain, deep valleys, massive mountain ranges, and harsh climates. She had to figure out how to feed, hydrate, and physically move over 100,000 troops and auxiliaries using only 19th century technology.
So I have to ask, how well do you delegate? Because in the modern business world, some startups struggle to coordinate a team lunch. Meanwhile, Taytu was running an absolute operational masterpiece out in the wilderness. Her meticulous division of labor was astounding. Get this, she organized 7,000 men just to manage the royal tents. She had a specialized crew handling nothing but honeymead logistics. She commanded a select group of Benisango workers tasked with carrying 25,000 flatbreads baked fresh every single night. And she had a dedicated vanguard team clearing the next campsite before the army even arrived. They were effectively dismantling and rebuilding a massive pop-up city across the country every single day.
Okay, moving on to Module 3, Innovation During Crisis.
When the Ethiopian army reached the Italian fort at Mekelle in early 1896, the top generals tried direct military assaults and took massive, unacceptable losses. That's when Empress Taytu stepped in and executed a brilliant, work smarter, not harder business pivot. Instead of a frontal assault, she deployed a specialized task force to sneak in and simply shut off the Italians' water streams just outside the fort. At the same time, she supplied her own frontline troops with rich food, music, and drinks to keep morale soaring. The contrast was devastating. The feasting Ethiopians held the line while the parched, dehydrated Italians were forced out without a single shot being fired. They just raised the white flag. It was a perfectly executed, bloodless strategy.
But the ultimate test of her crisis management came a few weeks later at the bloody climax of the Battle of Adwa. The Italians launched a massive surprise attack. Under incredibly heavy artillery fire, blinding smoke, and total chaos, the Ethiopian vanguard began to shatter. A section of the army actually began retreating. The entire enterprise was on the absolute brink of total collapse and bankruptcy.
Now picture the scene. The battle is slipping away. The generals are panicked. So what does the executive do? She leads from the front. Empress Taytu unveils her face, draws a pistol, and rides directly into the blistering artillery fire on horseback. She personally intercepts the retreating troops, shouting over the gunfire for her men to hold their ground, to show their bravery and fight. By thrusting herself into the frontline trenches when management was needed most, she injected a massive surge of motivation into her team. They turned around, held the line, and completely shifted the tide of the entire crisis.
The scale of what they achieved that day literally cannot be overstated. The Ethiopian forces utterly crushed the 19,000-strong Italian colonial army. It wasn't just a win. It was a market-defining monopoly on their own independence that sent shockwaves through all their European competitors. It stands to this day as the greatest defeat suffered by a European power in Africa in the 19th century, permanently securing Ethiopia's absolute autonomy.
A truly effective executive, however, knows that the job doesn't end when the crisis is averted, right? You also have to manage the aftermath. And Taytu delivered a masterclass in post-conflict public relations and corporate social responsibility. She organized what was essentially an Ethiopian Red Cross, deploying 10,000 women to follow the army with water jugs. She directed them to treat the wounded, but critically, not just her own men. They treated the defeated, bleeding Italian soldiers as well. It was a highly strategic, magnanimous level of wartime mercy that fundamentally elevated Ethiopia's standing on the global stage.
Which leads us perfectly into our final module, building a lasting legacy. A great wartime CEO must inevitably pivot to become a visionary peacetime builder, and Taytu rapidly diversified her nation's portfolio. She transitioned brilliantly from defense right into infrastructure, hospitality, and finance. She literally founded and named the modern capital city Addis Ababa, which means new flower. She financed the country's first hotel, capitalized an agricultural bank to spur domestic economic growth, built extensive educational networks for orphans, and yes, she even had the foresight to hire the nation's very first dentist. She proved she was a master of holistic growth and social development.
Her executive resolve did so much more than save one country, though. It created a blueprint for independence that changed the world. The stunning victory at Adwa ignited the global Pan-African movement. It became the definitive proof that African nations could fiercely and successfully defend their autonomy against massive external conglomerates. Her strategic brilliance directly inspired generations of later civil rights and independence leaders, from Marcus Garvey all the way to Nelson Mandela.
So, knowing how meticulously Empress Taytu managed deceptive contracts, impossible logistics, and life-or-death frontline crises, how will your leadership be remembered when the pressure is on? It's the ultimate question for any modern executive. I really hope this explainer gave you some incredible insights into one of history's most brilliant minds. Thanks for learning with me today.